Chapter 5 has a bunch in the way of new concepts, but not a lot of new forms to memorize. So there's a bunch of ideas here that will change some forms you already know, but not a whole lot new paradigms, for instance. The first concept is contract verbs with alpha. So last chapter we discussed briefly contract verbs with epsilon and contract verbs very briefly with omicron. And we saw how that can change things. Most notably, we've seen from the very beginning, the imperatives, right? If you attach an epsilon to an epsilon, you get epsilon iota. So you end up with an imperative that looks like a third person singular. If you attach an epsilon to an omicron, you end up with an imperative that says oo, right? And we saw there were a couple other examples of how epsilon contract verbs can slightly change the spelling of your normal o ace a amen eta usa verb paradigm. Alpha's a little more serious, the changes are a little more drastic or make it slightly harder to recognize, but it's the same thing. So your endings are still o ace a amen eta usa, but the alpha at the end of the stem, so this is the verb to honor, it ends with the alpha. The alpha is going to eat any short vowels. So it's going to eat epsilons and omicrons, the two short ones, because epsilon, the long E, is eta, and the long O is omega. So the long vowels are going to be fine, but the short vowels are just going to get consumed by the alpha. So timao, timo, omega wins. That is pretty much what you'd expect. But tima plus ace becomes timas with an iota subscript. So that iota has stuck around, but it's subscripted to the alpha. So the epsilon's been eaten by the alpha, and the iota is subscripted. So you may not recognize that if you weren't expecting to see alphas contract with their endings. Same thing happens with tima with an iota subscript. So that epsilon has been eaten by the alpha and the iota is subscripted. Tima amen. This is perhaps the hardest one to predict. That omicron is going to usually combine with the thing that's eating it. So we saw that omicron plus epsilon becomes omicron upsilon, oo, and omicron plus alpha becomes omega. So timomen. That one probably is the hardest one to recognize. And we're going to learn later that this actually generates a biform. This timomen is actually used for a different set of endings, the subjunctive. But that's way down the road. For now, you can trust that omicron is going to combine with alpha to create omen. Again, same ending. You already know this ending. Just a slight different, some changes where the two vowels are meeting. Tim ete becomes timate, predictable. This circumflex, by the way, really common with contract verbs. When the alphas are when letters are combining, a circumflex often shows up to mark the combination. And tim usen becomes tim ose, timose. Same thing that's happening in the first person singular is happening here. The omicron vowel, here in omicron upsilon, is combining with the alpha to create an omega. So, no new paradigm, just a new way that vowels interact when they hit each other. Recessive accent of finite verbs, give that a look over. We've talked about this before. Finite verbs, the accent is going to run towards the beginning of the word as much as it's able. And things will pull it back. Notably, contract verbs will put the macron over the contraction. Then they sneak in an important concept here. Again, this isn't actually hard, and we've seen this happen once before in the reading. But it's not how English works. So they'll use a article, the word the, all by itself, sort of the way we'll use a pronoun sometimes. And usually at the beginning of a sentence, and often with the word de. So the de is going to mark a slight transition. You can transit it with but or and. We've talked about this a bunch of times. But it's going to be used with an article all by itself. And they can do this. We can't do this with the, because the for us doesn't have number. it doesn't have gender, and it doesn't have case. But for them, the contains all that information, so it can act kind of like a pronoun sometimes. They still have pronouns, and they'll use them differently. And this most often happens, though not exclusively, but it most often happens with subject. So a new nominative, singular or plural, doesn't matter. A new nominative subject, a transition of subject, can be marked with just using the article all by itself. So look over these examples. But it flees. Now, it here is masculine in Greek because the thing it's referring to, the hair in this context, is grammatically masculine. But we use a neuter it because we treat animals neuter most of the time. But notice, he for a person, he uparastan is not present, and he proskore approaches, and she approaches. So hey there, the nominative singular feminine, translating it she as if it were the pronoun. So that's a different thing that English doesn't have, but it's not conceptually hard, right? They just have an article that's got a bunch of extra grammatical information, so they can use it in ways that we can't use our article. We've looked at elision before. This is the dropping of a vowel at the end of a word that's followed by a word starting with a vowel. So Allah becomes all before a vowel, and ara, which functions as a question mark, more or less in Greek, is followed when it's followed by a vowel, will drop its final vowel. And they helpfully mark these with an apostrophe in your textbook, which happens sometimes in the manuscripts. There's a discussion here of elision taking place with when prepositions are added to the front of verbs. So we've looked at this before, how Greek likes to stack prepositions on the front, and it's really common for a preposition to end with a vowel. I think almost, well, not all of them, like ice doesn't, but it's really common for a preposition to end with a vowel, and some verbs start with a vowel, and so things are going to happen when those interact. Usually, you're just going to drop something. Most of the time, you're just going to drop the last vowel in the preposition you're combining. So, ana plus airo becomes anairo. Epi plus airo becomes a pyro. This isn't hard, right? You still have to be able to recognize epi in a pyro, which is not that difficult. Just recognize that you've lost the final vowel in your preposition. Okay, then we got to go to part B. So we've already learned that this is kind of obvious. Verbs and their subjects are going to agree in number. If you have a plural subject, the men, you need a plural verb. That's how that works. Always. Except for no obvious reason, for reason I cannot explain, Greek will, something like 75% of the time, use singular verbs with neuter plurals. It just does. It just doesn't make sense. It is just how they just pair neuter plurals with singular verbs. This does not affect larger scheme. This is just an exception to the rule. So you should still expect plural subjects with plural verbs, singular subjects with singular verbs. That's what it means to have a plural verb. Except for some reason, a bunch of the time, plural neuter subjects, ta probata, can take singular verbs. Poye. The sheep do something. Okay? Personal pronouns. You're getting your full personal pronoun paradigm. Nice alliteration. I've lost it. Here we are. Your full personal pronoun paradigm. Ego, emu, emoi, eme. We're declining the word I, genitive, dative, accusative. So I, of me, to me, me. Note here that this genitive emu is not usually going to be used for possession. It's going to be used for characterization and things like that, but we're going to have a different word used for possession. Ames, amon, amin, amas, su, soy, se. So these kind of, they sort of fit the paradigm. The genitive fits, the dative fits. Some of the accusative forms kind of fit, but it's kind of irregular. It's actually a blending of multiple declensions. So you kind of just need to memorize these. If it was me, I would just make a special set of flashcards, and I would keep them separate from the rest of my flashcards just for pronouns, and write out ego on its own card, emu on its own card, emoi on its own card. I think that'll benefit you. And you'll learn that Greek actually has a bunch more pronouns. They have 3 different kinds of third-person pronouns. They've got emphatic pronouns and reflexive pronouns. They've got a bunch of pronoun things. So having a special little set of pronoun cards that you go to not as often as you go to your normal vocab words, but go to it every so often, might be a good long-term investment to write all of these. I'll write all of these out. I think that's a good call. Here's some of your third-person pronouns. They're not giving you the nominative here for reasons. You've kind of already seen it. It's not used in the same way that we use our nominative pronoun, he, she, and it. They use it slightly different. We've seen it. It's autos, auta. But they don't want to give it to you here because they don't want you to think that to say he verbs, you're going to use autos. Because you're not. That's not very Greek. But autu, auto, auton, of him, to him, him as the direct object. Add that to your pronoun list. Again, feel free to take a break. This is long, but you're not actually learning a lot of new forms. Those pronouns are kind of your only new forms. You're learning concepts, and you kind of need to practice these concepts, so make sure you look at the exercises. Here's a new concept: attributive versus predicate position. And basically, this is talking about the position of an adjective. An attributive position, it means we're going to take, our statement is taking that adjective for granted about the noun. The beautiful house is over there. I bought the beautiful house. That's the beautiful house. Please go to the beautiful house. In all of those sentences, I'm not asserting that the house is beautiful. That isn't actually like the point I'm making, right? It's not what I'm telling you about the house. I am just using the adjective beautiful as an attribute, attributive, as an attribute of house to probably further specify to pick out which house I'm talking about, right? I'm taking for granted that it's beautiful. I'm not asserting it, right? That's what attributive position is. An attributive position, the easiest way to do this is to just remember that attributive position means there's an article directly in front of the adjective. So, hei, kale, oikia is the beautiful house. Nice English word order. Very Greek, though, is hei, oikia, hei, kale. Just means the beautiful house. These are equivalent sentences. Or noun phrases. They're equivalent noun phrases. The house of the beautiful is what it literally says, but because the article is next to the adjective, it's attributive. So, attributive means article is next to the adjective. Predicate is if you want to assert this about the verb, and you can do this with or without the verb to be. We've seen it a bunch with the verb to be, but you don't always need the verb to be. And notice, predicate means there's no article in front of the adjective. Kale, hei, oikia. This is the most natural Greek construction. It's a prior predicate, so the adjective is coming before the subject, which is very normal. And there's no article there. So it's just, this is a way of saying the house is beautiful. Kale, hei, oikia. There's no adjective in front of there's no article in front of the adjective, so it's in predicate position. We're asserting it. This is possible in Greek. This happens in Greek, in fact. It's less common, I would say, but this is also predicate. Even though it looks, to us, to our eyes, this doesn't look predicate. This looks like maybe a natural way to say the beautiful house. It's not. And notice the difference between the two. There's no article here in front of kale, so it's just the house beautiful. And this is a way of saying the house is beautiful. So note the role here the definite article is playing in distinguishing between whether you are asserting something about a noun, whether you're asserting an adjective, or you are taking for granted as an attribute of that noun the adjective. So attributive position has an article in front of the adjective, a predicate position does not. Finally, I think this is the last concept, basically, we have the possessive pronouns. If you want to say something is mine or yours, you generally do not use the genitive of the personal pronoun. We do in English, right? In English, we say the personal pronoun is me, my, or I, my, me, you, yours, you. That's the pronouns in English. So we use the pronoun to describe, this is my water bottle, right? In Greek, you're going to do something slightly different. You're going to use possessive adjectives instead of a possessive form or genitive form of the pronoun. And so here they are, emos and sos. And notice, you might be a person who identifies masculine, you might be a person who identifies feminine, or you might have a neuter object, so some inanimate object is talking in the story, or it's actually there are some like job titles or like designations for kinds of people that are neuter. So this might be a person using a neuter my. I think generally people would, in ancient Greece, would have used masculine or feminine. So it exists in all three grammatical genders, and of course it's going to decline, right? This is the second declension masculine, first declension feminine, second declension neuter. It's what's called a 2-1-2. Second declension masculine, first declension feminine, second declension neuter. So it's going to follow the standard paradigm, the standard 2-1-2 paradigm. Os, u, o, on, oi, on, ois, us, right? And why it's important this is an adjective rather than a pronoun is because if it was a pronoun, it would just sit in the genitive all the time. That's what genitive does. One of the things it can do is show possession. But that's what pronouns do. But we don't use pronouns, we use adjectives for possession, which means it's going to match the noun it's modifying in case, gender, and number. The personal pronoun is going to match the case of the thing being possessed. So if you're possessing a dog in this first sentence, kuon, that's the nominative form, just trust us on that, you're going to put the word emos in the nominative to match my dog. Not genitive here, because you're matching the adjective to the noun being possessed. Now someone's talking and saying, your dog, sas kuon. Also, the dog here is nominative, so we're going to use it in the nominative to match. If you're going to say, I'm going to do something to my dog, we would then, they don't give a good example here, that's frustrating. If you're going to do something to your dog, that would then be emon. Go on, when the accusative form. So you would change the possessive adjective into the accusative case to match the accusative noun being possessed. If you're going to give something to a human, anthropos, you're going to give something to them, so it becomes anthropo, the dative form. You would then change the possessive pronoun to my human. That's kind of weird. But emo, right? You would change the possessive pronoun into the form that matches the case of the noun being possessed. Okay? And that's important. You're going to match adjectives in case, gender, and number to whatever thing is being possessed. There is no possessive adjective for the third person. Everything I just said about possessive pronouns, or adjectives rather than pronouns, is only true for the first and second person. Or for the first and second person pronouns. For me and you. For my thing and your thing. For our thing and y'all's thing. For third persons, if you want to say his, you do exactly what we do in English. You use the genitive form of the pronoun. Autos. Well, here, it's autu, autes, autu is the the genitives forms. And the plural for, you might have noticed, genitive plurals are always the same for all three genders, so it's auton. So that's nice, because that's exactly how English works. This is the word his. The very last thing they give you, again, no new paradigms here, this is the same endings, is they're giving you the adjective autos. You might notice this looks an awful lot like the third person pronoun, which is autu, auto, right? And here we have the adjective autu, auto. It's a different use. It's basically a different use of the same word. And they're calling this the intensifying adjective. And hey, there's a nominative here. So this is how they actually use the nominative. You can think about these as basically the same word, just that outside of the nominative, it can function as a pronoun. But in all cases, including the nominative, but also the genitive, it can function as a sort of intensifying, as an intensifier, as sort of being emphatic. And it can appear right next to the noun. It can appear alongside the noun, like in this case. So, what is it? Papos? Hapapos ton lukon auton ora. The grandfather rather, sees, alpha contract verb. See, everyone see that? The grandfather sees the wolf auton. That seems redundant, yes. If that lukon wasn't there, you could just say the grandfather sees it, right? That's functioning as a pronoun. But here it's functioning as an intensifying adjective. So the grandfather sees the wolf itself, the very wolf, the wolf itself, right? It's intensifying the noun it's matching. So it's functioning as an adjective that intensifies the thing. Okay? Bunch of concepts, but there actually weren't many new forms outside of maybe the pronouns, and even those, 50% of those follow a paradigm you've already learned. So hopefully this chapter stretches your brain conceptually, but doesn't occupy tons of your time in memorizing new paradigms. Might not be a bad idea to watch this, read the book, watch this again with the book in front of you, and look at these exercises. See if you can make sense of the exercises scattered in between.